For the past 135 years, motion picture has existed. It began in small forms and slowly became one of the most innovative ways of self-expression. People strive to be in or a part of films because they have become such a large part of everyone's lives. Film has become so frequent that in the opinion of many people, it is not appreciated like it used to be. To really show you how motion picture has evolved over the years, we need to go into a bit of history. In the year 1878, a man named Edward Muybridge created a short film titled Horse in Motion. Although it is only a few seconds long, it is believed to be the first ever motion picture. What nobody knew is that it would be something huge, something revolutionary. The most innovative thinkers began work on their own motion pictures. Short films were created in hopes of being big. These motion pictures, shot in the late 1870s to mid-1880s, were by using multiple cameras that shot individual pictures that made up one whole film, until the late 1880s when the first movie camera was invented. The first movie believed to be shot using continuous film was called Monkey Shines No. 1. Although terrible quality to us nowadays, this was monumental. Early on films were more like screen tests. Once movies with actual storylines came into play, film became a part of so many lives. Classic stories were put into motion, and in this generation, we still love these films so much, we insist on remaking them. We decided when making this documentary that we would show the public 4 different movie genres that we believe have evolved the most over the years: horror, comedy, musicals, and animation.
Horror films have been around almost as long as films themselves. The late 1880s was when the first ever recorded horror film was made, but I decided to go a little more recent than that. I started by analyzing subgenres of horror. That's when I realized that certain time periods hosted certain subgenres. There was the monster era, which included movies like Frankenstein in 1910, Nosferatu in 1922, and Dracula in 1931. This era soon became cheesy when scarier things came into play. The slasher era, which featured movies like Halloween in 1978, Friday the 13th in 1980, and Nightmare on Elm Street in 1984. Although slasher flicks and even a few vampire stories these days can still frighten or at least amuse an audience, what really has our generation on the edge of our seats is paranormal. Paranormal Activity, created in 2007, Insidious, made in 2010, and of course the newest remake yet, Evil Dead, released only weeks ago. These 3 subgenres, monsters, murderers, and the paranormal, have frightened all who have had the luck to witness. Frankenstein, created in 1910, although not scary to us was quite frightening in its day, is about a doctor who creates a monster. Yes, that's really it. Halloween is about a young boy, Michael Myers, murdering his entire family, then escaping a mental institution when he's all grown up to wreak havoc on his hometown and kill his baby sister. Paranormal Activity is not only terrifying in its paranormal aspect, but the use of the camcorder effect brought an extra amount of suspense and fright. Horror movies, in my opinion, beautifully crafted, have been around forever and will be around forever to come.
Comedy has gone from fun and physical to dark and hilarious over the past 100 or so years. Rather campy laughs were captured in early on comedy. Movies like The Court Jester, created in 1955, and Some Like It Hot in 1959, were hilarious films all about mistaken identity and confusion. In the 1970s, an era based simply on mocking other films came into play: Naked Gun in 1988, and Scary Movie, created in 2000. These comedies were based off of making fun of other movies. This is not the worst comedy could get. The comedies that thrills a generation is built off of pushing the limits, such as Ted, released in 2012, and Bad Teacher, released in 2011. The Court Jester is about a carnival performer who disguises himself as a court jester in hopes to defeat the evil ruler who has overthrown the rightful king. It has rhyming and lots of physical humor. In 1988, the movie Naked Gun, starring Leslie Nielsen, came out. It was a spoof of many famous crime dramas. Maker of Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane, created the movie Ted in 2012 about a little boy's Christmas wish to have a real teddy bear becomes true. Yet as this bear grows up, he becomes a very inappropriate person, or a bear. Some would argue that comedy has taken a nosedive over the years.
Now pull into traffic.
Soon enough, when sound became part of films, it seems that singing and dancing came along with it. The Wizard of Oz, released in 1939, Mary Poppins, created in 1964, and The Sound of Music, made in 1965, all gave viewers hope that singing and dancing could solve anything. Yet after a while, it seemed that people wanted to see more than just Julie Andrews and a cowardly lion sing a song or two. Rebellious musicals came into play, and stories about rebels falling in love without a cause with high-class girls. These musicals are usually set in the 50s, with movies like Grease made in 1978, Footloose made in 1984, and Crybaby made in 1990. Yet as the years went on, people wanted to see musicals about people who dance for a living. The club musicals are what our generation loves. Movies like Burlesque, released in 2010, award-winning Chicago, released in 2002, and Moulin Rouge, released in 2001. These movies showed the real side of those who maybe didn't make it to on-screen musicals. The Wizard of Oz is a timeless tale of a young girl trying to find her way home after getting swept up in a tornado that hit her hometown, Kansas. She's accompanied by 3 friends who are all in search for their own things: a brain, a heart, and some courage. Some say this is the best film ever created. It captures magic, life lessons, and the good and the bad in one amazing film. It is also one of the first ever movies to use a color camera. Grease is about a greaser and a Sash falling in love. Danny and Sandy found it difficult to be together because of everything pulling them apart. But their willingness to change for each other makes the story loved by so many. Burlesque is about a girl who desperately wants to escape her small town and get to a big city. When she finds her way to LA, she discovers a burlesque club and instantly falls in love. Although the performers don't actually sing, Christina Aguilera's character Allie changes all of that with her big voice and huge heart. Over the years, although musicals have displayed different stories and morals, there is still a common magic that has stayed present through all.
Most would argue that animation began with Walt Disney, but in reality it started even before that. It began with Thomas Edison in 1906, but quickly after that, Walt Disney began making his own little cartoons. Steamboat Willie, made in 1928, features the little mouse that we all know as Mickey these days. This was the beginning of a huge empire of innovative thinkers, all of them trying to make each film more advanced than the last one. It thrived into the early Disney movies, which were all about the princesses. Snow White, created in 1937, Cinderella in 1950, and Sleeping Beauty in 1959, led to every little girl wanting to be these princesses. This was all hand-drawn animation, yet in the early 1980s, computer animation came into play. Later on, Edwin Catmull and Steve Jobs would create a company called Pixar that would change animation forever. Creating short films and commercials at first soon turned into movies like Toy Story, created in 1996, Monsters, Inc. in 2001, and Finding Nemo in 2003. These movies showed large landscapes of completely animated objects. It was monumental. Now that computer animation had been figured out, the next step was to use it in more innovative ways, like using realistic computer animated humans in movies like Avatar in 2009, and of course another remake, The Planet of the Apes, also released in 2001. Animation is one of the most, if not the most, innovative ways of making film. It can always be improved, and it is always changing. Movies like Snow White, which is just simply about a girl trying to overcome her limitations that have been set out by her evil stepmother. Toy Story, which is just about some toys trying to find their way home, and Avatar, which is about discovering a whole new world. These movies all have such originality, and they are all amazing. They are proof that things can evolve in a good way.
Although the way movies themselves have evolved isn't necessarily bad, aside from a few storylines, the way generations have felt towards film has changed in all the wrong ways. Our generation seems to lack the appreciation that past generations has had for good films, or any films at all. Motion picture has become so easily accessible that the appreciation for it all has gone out the window. Now that we have presented all the facts, we decided to interview some of our classmates to see what their take on movies were. We also decided to interview our English teacher, Miss Lees, and the film studies teacher at our school, Mr. Kelly.
I'd have to say horror movies because their technology, it evolves, so now they can do way more scarier effects and stuff compared to before.
I think horror has changed the most.
All right, Anna.
I think comedy and romance and action sort of.
Okay.
I think action, adventure.
Okay, and comedy, adventure, horror, all those.
I think
comedy has evolved the most.
Okay. And
Comedy and horror. Of the following.
Karate Kid. I've only watched the remake.
Okay, and then Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I like the remake because Johnny Depp, obviously.
And of the following movies, which do you prefer, the original or the remake? And then the first one's Karate Kid.
I prefer the remake for Karate Kid.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Remake as well.
And Hairspray.
I think remake still.
The remake or the original? And the first one is the Karate Kid.
The remake?
Okay, and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I like the original.
And Hairspray.
Remake.
Okay. And of the following movies, which do you prefer, the remake or the original? And the first one's the Karate Kid.
The remake.
And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
The remake.
And Hairspray.
The original.
Following movies, which do you prefer, the remake or the original? The first one's the Karate Kid.
The remake.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
The original.
And Hairspray.
Probably the remake.
And of the following movies, which do you prefer, the remake or the original? And the first movie is the Karate Kid.
In the Karate Kid, I think I prefer the original.
And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
The original as well.
And Hairspray.
Hairspray, I like the remake.
Remake or the original? The Karate Kid.
The original.
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
The remake.
And Hairspray.
The remake.
I probably have to say horror. Everyone is horror. Personally, I don't like horror movies, but a lot of my friends.
For teenagers, I think probably comedy.
I think comedy and horror, sort of, romance and action.
I think comedy and probably drama and action.
Probably romance or comedy.
Horror and comedy.
The prices of movies, they're really overpriced. I spend, whenever I go to the movie theater, I spend at least $30. So, yeah.
I think it's too expensive considering if you go there a lot, it's cost a lot of money.
Well, actually, I don't really mind the prices because I barely go to the movie theater, so yeah. It did get more expensive, but I don't go, so I don't go very often, so.
I find them more expensive.
It is getting more expensive, but it's alright because everything's getting more expensive.
Expensive.
Your movie experience when you were a kid?
When I was young, we couldn't afford a lot of movies, so it was kind of a big treat to go to the movies. The whole family or a group of friends would go, and it was a big treat.
What genre of movies do you think has changed or evolved the most over the years?
I think animation and computer animation has been the biggest advance in movies over the years.
We asked a few teens if they preferred the remake or the original of movies like The Karate Kid, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Hairspray. Most said they preferred the remakes. Why do you think that is?
That's a really good question. And I heard the same question posed about a year ago on the radio about remakes of songs. And they talked about how people tend to prefer the version they hear first, the version you know first. So, me, I like the original Karate Kid. The original Hairspray was good, and what was the other one?
Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
And the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was great. So I can totally understand why you might prefer the one you've grown up with, because it has more current actors, more up-to-date effects, etc.
What genre of movies do you think is the most popular among teens?
Among teens, I'm thinking the scary movie or the horror flicks, or maybe, what do we call them? Kind of like the spoof movies with a lot of sort of potty humor, a lot of body jokes, that kind of thing.
Describe how you feel about the prices at the movies nowadays. Would you say it's too expensive?
It is expensive for a family to go. Even I like to buy the coupons ahead of time so that it only costs me about $8 or $8.50 a movie as opposed to the $13. So I buy bundles from people who are selling for charity because I don't like to spend a lot.
And last question, how do you feel about the movies in the present time as opposed to movies when you were a kid?
I still enjoy the movies a lot. In some ways I think there's so many movies and there's so many options for people that it's not necessarily as valued as it was before they were available on TV, online, in your phone, on your iPad. I think some of the artistry maybe is not as valued anymore because it's so available, but I think it's still a valuable art form.
The experience when you were a kid?
The movies for me were always a really magical thing. Just because of what my passions are. I love theater and film and acting, and that's something that I grew up loving, and I love storytelling. So for me, movies were always something that I really, really enjoyed. I tended to go to them a lot, and I'd go to them with my friends. They were always a big part of my life, and they still are today.
What genre of movies do you think has changed or evolved the most over the years?
I think probably action films. I'd say if you were to look back, action films didn't exist in the same way as they do now, and just because of all the CGI that we're capable of doing, they're completely different entity now than they ever were. The expectations of them are so much higher, and it's almost like sometimes the acting means nothing in them. It's just more what they're capable of creating visually that will help the film achieve at a high level. So I'd say that that's the most change I've seen in any film genre.
We asked a few teens if they preferred the remake or the original of movies like The Karate Kid, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and Hairspray. Most said they preferred the remake. Why do you think this is?
Because they probably haven't seen the original? No, I'm just kidding. I think that might be part of it in some cases. Like maybe they've seen the original, but not considering the quality of it being held back by the time, maybe. And I think that maybe it's just filming now is just more vivid. Like it's more engaging. There's more colors in it. There's more ability, like I said, with CGI to achieve certain things to make them more realistic looking, but they may be missing out on some of the subtle nuances which may have been better in the originals. So maybe it's just a lack of education, I don't know, in film.
What genre of movies do you think is most popular amongst teens?
It depends on the group of teens. Like I'd say probably horror. I'd say probably like cheesy romance, and then anything that makes fun of everything. So like Scary Movie 8 or whatever, which doesn't exist yet, but you know one day will, and everyone your age group will like it. I think that those genres are probably the most appealing, and then really, really wacky comedy, like Anchorman. You get my references there? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Okay. Describe how you feel about the prices of movies today.
I feel like it's definitely cheap. If I were speaking from my past, and it's inflated so much. Like, not to date myself, but if I were to think back to when I was young, I could probably go to the movies for $5, which is really crazy when you think about now. You're looking at least $15 probably to go to a film, and then there was always like cheaper Tuesday nights, which would be even cheaper. So I think that rates have gone up exponentially over the years, but it makes sense that they have. Like I think that with people being able to pirate films so much, that they need to be making that kind of money for people who are coming to see the films themselves in order to keep the industry afloat at all. I think, and it's just so much more expensive to make films. So I think that that's probably part of the reason why it's more expensive now as well.
And last question, how do you feel about movies in the present time as opposed to movies when you were a kid?
I think that a lot of storylines have become somewhat contrived. Like I think it's harder to find something original, but there's a lot more quantity being created. So that might be part of that. What I'm saying is that I think that that when a really original film comes out now, it's an oddity and it's really, really special. Whereas before there was less films being created, therefore more original films would pop up more easily, I think. Less competition.
Since 1878, with that first galloping horse, to today, 2013, film has evolved as an art form. It is a way to express,
To scare.
To laugh.
to dance and sing along,
To innovate.
to feel and to love. Over the past 135 years, film has grown. It will grow even more, and maybe generations will grow too. Maybe generations will be able to appreciate past art through films as well. We can't tell the future, but we can tell everything is always changing.